Hello and welcome to the 106th of a second photography podcast. If things sound a little bit different today, that's because I'm using different audio recording equipment. I'm trying out some new equipment. I've ordered some new gear and it's arrived and I'm going to be using that for recording the podcast. Hopefully it will give a better sound. Hopefully it'll make it easier for me to do the podcast and hopefully it won't be any worse than my previous output, but there we are. So today I'm talking about Canon's greatest invention. Now, Canon cameras have been around for a very long time. They've been a leader. You could argue now they're not a leader or they are a leader. And I want to talk about their greatest invention, and you'll be surprised what I think their greatest invention is, and you'll probably disagree with me with what I think their greatest invention is. And it is not by any points a modern invention, although I do feel they could bring it back. It goes back to film cameras. Now, Canon had this excellent way to pick the autofocus point. So in the old days of film, you didn't have that many autofocus points, and if you buy one of Canon's DSLRs now, and it's one of the lower priced ones, you'll probably have maybe 9 or 15 autofocus points. And with autofocus points, you can have them all on, or you can pick individual ones. And typically you might go for the center, so you would align your center one with where you wanted the focus to be, you would autofocus on it and then you'd recompose. Now typically you would do that with a person. You might focus on their eye and then you'd recompose. If you're shooting at a shallow depth of field, maybe f1.8, f2, when you recompose you might be a little bit out of focus just by moving the camera at such a shallow depth of field. So probably it's better to use a autofocus point that isn't one of the center ones. Maybe the one furthest right, maybe the one furthest left, maybe the one at the top, maybe the one at the bottom. And so you'll be moving your camera less when you recompose, you'll get the better composition that you want and it's more likely to be in focus. But it is fiddly to go and select your autofocus point. You can do it with a little joystick or a wheel, but it's fiddly, and particularly when you've got your eye up to the viewfinder or the EVF or whatever you use, it's fiddly. Modern cameras, like really modern cameras, they might have 45, 90 autofocus points. Some of the Sony ones will have 200, some of the mirrorless ones, and you can pretty much put it on all of them, it'll pick the right one. Nowadays you've got eye autofocus, but for those cameras that don't have it, you've got that problem and you're going to be changing your autofocus point. Now, going back to the film days where we had autofocus, Canon had this excellent way of automatically, without taking your eye away from the viewfinder, picking the autofocus point you want, and it was called eye-controlled autofocus. And I actually had a film camera that had it in. I might still have it. I'd have to go through my sort of lot of film cameras and have a look, but I used it and it was absolutely excellent. So I had one that you could even calibrate it. You put your eye up to the viewfinder in the sort of cut bit, and where you looked was the autofocus point that it picked. So if you moved your eye around, it would pick different autofocus points, and you know what? It was incredibly reliable, and particularly if you calibrated it as well. And I wore glasses and it still worked for me. So I could change autofocus points just by looking. Now, no one's done anything like this since. So this came out in 1992. It came out on the EOS AE2, and Canon kept it in their SLR lineup until 2004, and the last one to have it in was the EOS Elan 7NE, and I think I had the Elan, and I think that's where it had it, and that was like the most advanced one in the system because it was the last one out, and it had the ability to calibrate. And when you calibrated, it would just move around autofocus points and you'd look at them and it would just be more accurate when you looked at them the next time. So you could calibrate it. Fantastic. So you could just pick your autofocus points without using buttons, without taking your eye away from the camera. Now, in film days, you only got a maximum of 35 shots. So you weren't shooting loads and loads of images, and even if you were, you'd have to take your eye off the camera because you'd have to change the film out. So I actually think that this is more important in the digital age, where if you're a sports photographer, you might take 200 shots really quickly, and maybe a sports photographer is going to have a camera that's got eye autofocus anyway and focuses on a person's eye and has really advanced auto features, but to be able to pick your autofocus point specifically without taking your eye away from the camera and to be able to repeat and do this accurately time and time again, I think is fantastic. But it isn't in any cameras other than these old Canon film cameras. So I think this should come back to the digital age. I think it should come back to mirrorless cameras as well. I think it would be really, really good. And I think if Canon brought it back, or if any other company had anything similar, it would be one of those features that people would be like, oh wow, that's really good. Oh yeah, I'll upgrade for that camera. It's got eye autofocus, or it's got eye autofocus point picker. It would be fantastic. But like I say, it isn't in any current cameras, and it just died out. But I do think it was Canon's best invention simply because it was so reliable, it never failed, it never went wrong, it was very accurate, it was a really robust system, and it was just time and time again, pick it up, work it, it worked. Even if you turn the camera off or you hadn't used it for a month, it was still there, and it was just a thoroughly reliable system. Now, why I say it was Canon's greatest invention as well is because we can't say Canon invented film, we can't say they invented the digital sensor, we can't say they invented MP4 video. They've done some of those things really well, but they haven't invented them. They're things they've taken on. So this is one thing you can put your finger on. You can say Canon invented this, Canon did it, and no one else has done it. So I think that's Canon's greatest invention going. If you disagree with me, do let me know by leaving a comment. Do get in touch, do reach out on Twitter, Facebook, etc. And I'd also ask that you take a little bit of time to head over to my Instagram page and just give me a follow, give me a like, look at my posts. I'd really appreciate that. And my Instagram page is at 160spp. So that's instagram.com/160spp. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you next time.